Hey everyone, we want to discuss an interesting concept called instantaneous centers. And instantaneous centers allows us to do the relative motion that we've been doing in previous videos, but in a little bit more simplistic way, and it's kind of neat the way it works. And a good example of what we could do with instantaneous centers would be, say, a ladder or a board that's sliding down a wall. And so I've labeled C as the corner of the wall, F is the point where the ladder or the board are on the floor, W is the point where the ladder or the board are up against the wall. So we're going to look at how this has what we call an instantaneous center. But before we do that, we want to take a look at some rotating objects. Okay, so we'll do that and then we'll come right back to this. Okay, so here's a couple of staplers on a chair. And the way I have these staplers set up is that the bronze or gold looking stapler is basically on the center at the head of the stapler. So this is pretty much the center of the chair. But the green one is not. It's randomly placed on the chair. But as they undergo rotation, you'll note that the gold one is spinning around with the center of the chair at the nose of the gold stapler, right? And so this portion has no velocity, but out here, the velocity is perpendicular, so it's pointing in this direction, okay? It's pointing perpendicular to the radius, which is the stapler. Now I connected the green stapler to that bronze stapler on purpose. So there's a velocity of the same point. These are at the same point. They're both moving in this direction. But if we look at the velocity of the head of the green stapler, it's not forward, it's actually perpendicular to the center coming out to this green point here, to the green head there. So it's in this direction. So the center, what we call the instantaneous center, and actually it's the center of motion completely for this guy, the center of motion for the bronze stapler and for the green stapler is right down here at the center of motion of the chair, the central radius of the chair. But for the green stapler, if I take this one away, the center of motion of the green stapler hasn't changed, and it is not part of the stapler. But I do know that if I draw a radius vector from here to the end of the stapler, then the velocity there is perpendicular. And if I draw a line or a radius from here, the velocity there is also perpendicular to that radius vector. So the radius vector to this end and the radius vector to that end are different radii, different lengths, different distances, well, same as length, different angles. But the velocities at this point has to be perpendicular to this radius vector, and the velocity at this point has to be perpendicular to that radius vector. And so we want to take advantage of that as we look at this whole concept of instantaneous centers. All right, so we've seen now those staplers on the chair, and one of the things that's important to note is that on the extended body, in the case of whether it was the bronze stapler or the green one, the velocity of those points anywhere on the stapler, it doesn't even have to be the end points, anywhere on the stapler, must be perpendicular to the radius vector from the center of motion to that point on the stapler, or in this case on the ladder. Let's just call it a ladder, not a board. Okay, so where is the center of motion? That's what we want to know. But the idea here is that this velocity of the floor position with respect to the corner, that velocity is in this direction. And so I know if that's the velocity, that the center of motion must be along the radius vector, which is perpendicular there. And I don't know if it's below or above. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw perpendicular up and down. And then I'm going to take advantage of that same argument, and I'm going to go over here to where it's connected to the wall. And where the wall is at, this is moving down, and so the radius vector must be perpendicular to the velocity vector. But I don't know if it's left or right. So I'm going to go left, and I'm going to go right. But the idea here is that I now know, because the center of the motion of the ladder has to be at the same place for the floor as it is for the wall, that this point right here is the instantaneous center. That point is the instantaneous center. And so I can tell you how fast it's rotating because the velocity of the instantaneous center is 0 at this instant in time, hence the term instantaneous center. And so this thing is undergoing some omega, and in the case of the staplers, it was whatever the omega of the chair was. In this case, it's going to have some omega, it's rotating. And so I can say then that the velocity of the floor with respect to C, that's going to equal the velocity of the floor with respect to the instantaneous center, because the corner is at stationary, but so is the instantaneous center. By definition, it's stationary. Okay? At this instant in time. Very important. At this instant in time. But that's going to equal omega FW, the omega of the ladder, crossed with the position of F with respect to the instantaneous center. So I can figure out, if I have some dimensions on the ladder and the angles, I can figure out what that vector is. Right? This is R. This is R of the floor with respect to the instantaneous center. And that's going to give me the velocity then of the floor portion with respect to the instantaneous center. This omega right here is the same for the floor as it is for the wall. And so the velocity of the wall with respect to the instantaneous center, that's equal to omega FW, same omega FW I just discovered up here, crossed with the position of the wall with respect to the instantaneous center. And that would be this vector right here. That's the position of the wall with respect to the instantaneous center. And this is also going to be the velocity of the wall with respect to the corner. Right? And so I can find, depends on what information I'm given, I can use these relationships to determine whatever is not given. But the cool part is that the velocity has to be perpendicular to whatever the motion is. Now, if I'm interested in the velocity right here, I can draw that vector out, and it's going to be perpendicular. If I'm interested in the velocity here, I draw that vector out, and it's going to be perpendicular. There's 90 degrees there, 90 degrees there. So wherever it is I'm on the ladder, I can figure out where the what that velocity is, what that velocity vector is going to be. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when the ladder is here, the instantaneous center is right there, but a little bit later on, if the ladder is here, the instantaneous center is at a different position. Those are not the same position. So that's the really important part about the word instantaneous. It won't be there for long. But at this instant in time, the center of motion of this ladder is right there. And so I can use this to do, connected beams and stuff, and find out information. The long and the short of it is, this is easier if you have this possibility. This is almost always easier than the relative motion we've done in previous videos. All right, so this will get you started on the whole concept of instantaneous centers. If you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the comments down below. Thank you.